Hello and welcome to Proverbs, a letter to my son. Today we'll be looking at Lesson 10, Part 1, and we'll be using the New American Standard Translation as our base translation. I want to say from the start, this lesson is adult content. It's intended solely for married or engaged couples, so please keep that in mind. In Lesson 1, we're going to look at adultery and the disastrous consequences of an adulterous relationship. You might say, well, what's the big deal? Why all the sexual talk? Well, I counted them. A full 1/3 of the verses in chapters 1 through 9 deal with sexual attitudes and or actions. A full 1/3 by count. So in this study, in Part 1, we're going to look at Chapter 7, the adulteress and the tricks of her trade, and then we'll look at the last paragraph of Chapter 6, the disaster a jealous husband can inflict upon one who violates his wife. And then Chapter 9 talks about the prostitute and her disastrous end. All of this is Chapter 10, Part 1 we're going to look at today. And then in Part 2, we'll see the power that we have or can gain to refrain from getting involved in an adulterous relationship. And then Chapter 5, that's where I want to get to. We'll see how to adultery-proof a marriage. So for now, we're going to look at the adulteress and the tricks of her trade. Guys, beware. You can fall. You say, I'm a believer. I wouldn't fall. I know better. Well, our own pastor fell into adultery, and he preached against it. He's not the only one. But if men who preach the gospel, who study the scriptures, and know better, can succumb to this kind of a woman, what about us? So I say, guys, beware. 1 Corinthians 10:12, therefore let him who thinks he stands take heed, lest he fall. Because, guys, you can fall. When my wife and I first married, we covenanted together that I would not spend time alone with a woman. If she came to the house to get something, I'll step outside. She can go inside and get it. If she needed a ride, take my car, but we're not going to ride together because there's just so much potential for rumors. And even though it's not true, it can ruin a marriage. But it also saves us from getting involved with another person in a sexual encounter. Donna feels the same way, and she does the same thing. So we enjoyed and appreciated putting those safeties in place early in our marriage. So let's go to Chapter 7 now, verses 1 to 5. Knowing and living the word will keep you from getting involved in this kind of a woman. The text, my son, keep my words and treasure my commandments within you. Keep my commandments and live, and my teachings as the apple of your eye. Make them that precious to you. Bind them on your fingers. Write them on the table of your heart. I ask you, we sometimes read over these kind of words, them and them. What's it talking about? In this case, them is talking about my words and my commandments, the scriptures. We don't have Solomon here to teach us now, so we depend on the scriptures. They are the ones that will do the real work in our lives. But then it says, say to wisdom, you are my sister, and call understanding your intimate friend, that they may keep you from the adulteress and from the foreigner who flatters with her words. Now, what is they? Different than them. They is the wisdom and understanding. Don't let those get away. Make them so intimate with you that they will keep you from getting involved with an adulteress when she speaks those so inviting and welcoming words. In verses 6 through 9, the hunted is the guy that's going through the streets heading toward the adulteress's house. The hunter is the adulteress that's hunting for him to get him to join her in illicit sexual relationships. So in this case, the hunted, this guy, is in this case, the hunted, Solomon says he saw, for at the window of my house I looked out through the lattice, and I saw among the naive and discerned among the youths a young man lacking sense, passing through the street near her corner, and he takes the way to her house in the twilight, in the evening, in the middle of the night, and in the darkness. So these two had apparently prearranged their encounter, and he is now out in the city heading toward her house, but he's doing it in almost complete darkness, so people won't recognize him. But what kind of person is this young man? Notice it says, a young man lacking sense. Well, why is this young man lacking sense? Well, look at his companions. He said he saw them, what? Among the naive and among the youths. The youths, immature, haven't grown up yet. And the naive, they seldom, if ever, consider the consequences of their choices in life, and then they have to live with the adverse consequences that come along. So he's out there, and he's hunting for her house. I kind of think that he knew where the house was, and he's just being cautious. I get the impression as I study this that he's not completely convinced that he ought to go through with this. Well, she'll convince him. But he's going to her house, and then what kind of person is this adulteress? The hunter. She's the hunter. And behold, a woman comes to meet him dressed as a harlot and cunning of heart. She's boisterous and rebellious. Her feet do not remain at home. So what kind of woman is she? She's a woman who's not getting the sexual satisfaction at home or the emotional satisfaction at home, and she's seeking it somewhere else. But notice it says she's dressed so sexy, and she wants to allure him, and she wants him to look at her and say, ooh, well, I want you. And it says that she's cunning of heart. She's smart. She knows how to get to this guy's ego. Notice it says also that she is boisterous and rebellious. This boisterous, if you look at Proverbs chapter 9, verse 13, is talking about the woman of folly. She's boisterous too. So what is it? Bold, brash. She's going to get her way no matter what. And she's not intimidated in the least. So this is the woman. Now the hunter seeks the hunted. In verse 12, now she's without or outside her house, now in the streets, and layeth in wait at every corner. So she's out there scheming, almost lurking in corners, waiting to see him so she can grab him. So she seizes him and kisses him, and with brazen face says, brazen? What does that mean? Look down below. Dictionary.com states that brazen-faced is to be openly shameless. Verses 14 and 15 clarify our view of her illicit sexual conduct, and we're going to look at that next. So let's look at that, verses 14 and 15. Now we're going to talk about her words, and this includes verses 13 through 20. But for verses 14 and 15, first, she says, I'm good with God. We can enjoy illicit sex now. The text says, I was due to offer peace offerings. Today I have paid my vows. Therefore I have come out to meet you, to seek your presence earnestly, and I have found you. Oh, great. What's another way of looking at that? It was time for me to offer my peace offerings, and today I did. Now I'm in good standing with the man upstairs, so we're clear to have our fun. In Proverbs chapter 30, Augur's trying to convince his two young boys that they're sinners. It talks about a woman there who engages in an adulterous relationship and gets right out of bed and says, I haven't done anything wrong. This woman feels the same way. Now, as far as her words of enticement, point 2, I have made all the preparations. Look at the text. I've spread my couch with coverings, with colored linens of Egypt. I have sprinkled my bed with myrrh, aloes, and cinnamon. Everything's ready. Come on, join me. Nothing else to do but come and enjoy yourself. And then as far as her words, hubby's away. There's no way we can get caught. Come, let us drink our fill of love until the morning. Let us delight ourselves with caresses. For my husband is not at home. He's gone on a long journey. He's taken a bag of money with him, and at the full moon, he'll come home. These folks knew that they're not going to get caught. I remember when I was just young, I was too naive to realize what was going on then, but my dad was involved in illicit sexual relationships with several women while he was married to my mom. But I remember one time that we went by somebody's house, and he said, wait here in the pickup for me, I'll be back. And he mentioned that there was a sheet on the clothesline. Well, I learned later on that that was her signal to him that hubby's not home. It's safe for you to come in. So these folks do give signals that it's okay, it's clear, you can come, we won't get caught. So she's saying, all these preparations are done, come on, it's going to work great. So in verses 21 to 23, he yields, and he's going to live with disaster. Look at the text. With her many persuasions, she entices him. With her flattering lips, she seduces him. Suddenly, notice suddenly, he follows her as an ox goes to the slaughter, or as one in fetters to the discipline of fools, until an arrow pierces through his liver. We would say today, pierces his heart. As a bird hastens to the snare, so he does not know that it will cost him his life. And a better way to say it is, he does not know that he has forfeited his life by joining her in illicit sexual relationships. Now you'll notice that in chapter 7, the end of chapter 6, and in the end of chapter 9, all of them talk about the disastrous end that will come to the one who joins the adulteress in her sexual relationship. So that's the end of the guy. And he goes headlong without realizing what's going on. Why? He's simple. He's naive. He doesn't consider the consequences. And he says, ooh, this sounds fun. Let's go. So now, in verses 24 to 27, involvement in her results in disaster or death. Now, therefore, my son, listen to me and pay attention to the words of my mouth. Do not let your heart turn aside to her. If you look at a woman and you come back and look at her and you look and look, it's a possibility that in time you'll say, I want her for myself. Now, you may want to do what I do. When I see a really beautiful woman, I appreciate her beauty. But I say to myself, she's not mine. I have no right to her. Besides, I can find everything at home in the arms of my wife that I could find in the arms of this woman. And that's a true statement. And I'll explain when we get to chapter 5 why that's so. So don't let your heart be drawn to this beautiful woman. And don't stray into her path. Just stay away. Why? For many are the victims she's cast down, and numerous are all her slain. Her house is the way to Sheol, descending to the chambers of death. So this is the adulteress. This is the method that she uses. Understand, not all women are this way. Some are just lonely, and they need emotional support. And if you advance toward them, they'll go along with you. But they're not this hard, pushy kind of gal that's presented in chapter 7. Now, we looked at chapter 7. Let's look at chapter 6. It's the end paragraph of chapter 6, verses 20 to 35. In verses 24 and 25, learn to live the word, and you will not fall for her. The text, my son, observe the commandment of your father, and do not forsake the teaching of your mother. Bind them continually on your heart. Tie them around your neck. How do you make something a hard attitude? You do it over and 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 over until it becomes who you are. So we spend time in the commandments and in the teachings until they become what we are. If you'll notice, it says, observe the commandment. In chapter 7, verses 1 and 2, where we saw that we started, it said, my son, keep my words and treasure my commands within you. Keep my commandments and my teachings as the apple of your eye. So both of them start the same way. And you'll also notice that in chapter 9, it starts the same way. We'll look at that a little later on. But for right now, we'll stay with this one. In verses 22, it says, when you walk about, they will guide you. When you sleep, they will watch over you. When you awake, they will talk to you. So in verse 22, the text says, when you walk about, they will guide you. What's they? The commandments, the teaching. of Scripture. When you sleep, they will watch over you. When you awake, they will talk to you. So, wherever you go, they will lead you. While you're asleep, they'll protect you. And while you're awake, they'll talk to you and give you course corrections. So immerse yourself in Scripture. Make it your own. You stay in it and stay in it and stay in it and learn it and live it. And at times you'll wake up in the middle of the night and you'll find that it's speaking to you. Now in verse 23, it says, the commandment is a lamp. A lamp is a lot dimmer or not as bright as the teaching because the commandment just says, do it. But the teaching is a brighter light in the sense that it's telling you why you should do these things. It gives you understanding. And it's a whole lot better to do something because you know why you should do it than just to say, do it. But then reproofs for discipline of the way of life. We all need course corrections, and we continually need course corrections. And why? To keep you from the evil woman, from the smooth tongue of the adulteress. Guys, it's so easy for your ego to get inflated when some young gal starts talking real sweet to you and gives you the impression that she really wants you. Be careful, guys. People have fallen. Men have fallen. Many pastors have had to leave the ministry because of that very thing. Now in verse 25 and 20 through 29, don't lust for her or you'll get burned. Do not desire her beauty in your heart. I find it interesting in the virtuous woman section of chapter 31. It doesn't say anything about beauty as far as this virtuous woman. In fact, when Lemuel's mom was giving him advice as to what kind of wife to find, she said, beauty is vain. In other words, if you base your marriage on beauty, what's going to happen when she grows older and loses that beauty? What's left for the marriage? So he says, don't desire her beauty, and don't let her capture you with her eyelids. Oh, she looks so sweet and inviting, and she's trying to allure you. You need to be aware of that. And then, for on account of a harlot, one is reduced to a loaf of bread, and adulteress hunts for the precious life. In verse 27 to 29, he says, can you take fire in your chest and your clothes not get burned? Can you walk on hot coals and not scorch your feet? But he says, so is the one who goes into his neighbor's wife. Whoever touches her will not go unpunished. Another way to say it is, whoever touches her will get burned. I've seen that in my own dad. I've seen it in others who have gotten involved in sexual relationships like that. And it's just disaster. Now in verses 30 to 33, it said, men do not despise a thief if he steals to satisfy himself when he's hungry. Not a big deal. But when he's found, he has to repay. And then verse 32, the one who commits adultery with a woman is lacking sense. Of course, that's what this naive person is, isn't it? He who would destroy himself does it. Wounds and disgrace he will find, and his reproach will not be blotted out. The results are always disastrous. That's what this chapter 7, chapter 6, and chapter 9 are going to push. There's disaster waiting around the corner if you're foolish enough to get involved in such a relationship. Notice it says, and we're in chapter 6 now, not chapter 7, the one who commits adultery with a woman is lacking sense. He who would destroy himself does it. Wounds and disgrace he will find, and his approach will not be blotted out. Your reputation will be trashed, and people will remember that for years to come. Now here's the kicker in chapter 6. Remember, the husband of this woman you violated is going to get even. Look at this. For jealousy enrages a man, and he will not spare in the day of vengeance. He will not accept any ransom, nor will be satisfied, though you give him many gifts. This guy is jealous that you violated his wife, and he's going to get even to the point where he might kill you. Now I ask you, is it worth this kind of result for a few minutes of sexual pleasure? As I'll show you in chapter 5, you can enjoy that same sexual pleasure with your wife. And I'll tell you how. So now let's go to chapter 9. And in chapter 9, we're looking at the prostitute and her offer. As we go, I'll explain to you why I think this woman is a prostitute. Look at verse 13. This is verses 13 through 18 in chapter 9 now. The prostitute. The woman of folly is boisterous. She is naive, and she knows nothing. She doesn't consider the consequences of her choices. She's just doing what comes naturally. If it's fun, do it. If it feels good, do it. But this woman is belligerent. She's pushy. She's going to get her way no matter what, and she's going to push you to join her. So you need to make a concerted effort to resist this kind of thing. And then in verse 14 and 15, she makes herself readily available. Look where she sits, and this is why, this right here is why I say she's a prostitute and not just the adulteress. She sits at the doorway of her house on a seat by the high places of the city, calling to those who pass by who are making their paths straight. So where is she sitting? She's sitting on a seat out in public saying, "Ha, I'm available. Come on, come join me." Now, an adulteress doesn't do that. She'll pick one guy and get involved with one guy at a time. But this gal is offering herself to anyone. So the offer is there. But notice she's calling those who pass by who are making their way straight. Wisdom calls those who are ignorant and unknowing to come to her. But this woman is trying to call people that are living relatively good lives and say, "Come join me." So this is the kind of woman of folly that's boisterous. And then in verse 16, she seeks out naive and ignorant men. Look at the text. Whoever's naive, let him turn here. To him who lacks understanding, she says. So she's looking for naive and ignorant men to join her. Men who know better won't do it. So she's looking for those who don't know better. And then she entices men with secret pleasures. Look at the text. Stolen water is sweet, and bread eaten in secret is pleasant. Now, I have to admit, and you guys would all admit with me, aside from the conscious and the regret, the pleasure of engaging in sexual relationships with a woman like that would be pleasurable. Do you remember when Jacob wanted to marry his wife, Rachel, but Laban slipped in Leah, and they engaged in sexual union that night, and they get up the next morning and they get outside the tent. She takes her veil off, and it's like, "I married Rachel. What are you doing here?" And what I'm getting at is this. The physical sensation of sleeping with another man's wife would be really no different than sleeping with your own wife. The physical sensation. It's the emotional and everything else that goes along with it that is the attraction. This interesting here, she entices with secret pleasures, stolen waters. You got to keep it secret. And if you engage in an adulterous relationship, you have to keep it secret, because if it comes out, disaster waits around the corner. Look at verse 18. Her participants are dead already. They just don't know it. Look at the text. But he does not know that the dead are there and that her guests are in the depths of Sheol. They're dead already. They just don't know it. In all three of these segments, the result is disastrous and possibly fatal. It isn't worth it. What Solomon's trying to get us to see is we need to settle in with one wife, enjoy her, and not go chasing anything with a skirt. I find it fascinating in Proverbs chapter 31, Lemuel's mother is teaching him and says, don't go for that which destroys kings, and don't chase women. You see in verse 3? Look at it when you get a chance. Those two things are covered. He says, instead, find a good woman. Don't just chase anything that wears a skirt. And Solomon's saying here, if you get involved in an adulterous relationship, the consequences are always disastrous. Don't go there. Now, in the next lesson, in part 2, chapter 10, part 2, we're going to see how to adultery-proof a marriage. This is where I want to get to. It's beautiful stuff. And I've said before, and I'll say it again, when I see a beautiful woman, I say, and my mind starts to wander, I said, she's not mine. I have no right to her. And besides, everything I could find in the arms of that woman, I can find in the arms of my wife. And I mean it because it's true. And you can know it too. I hope you'll join me in the next session of chapter 10. And I think you'll find it as beautiful as I do. Thank you.